I would like to welcome you again to the Sunday Bhagavatam program. As you all know, Sunita Mataji is going to give a class today. Just a little introduction about her, really. I think you must have heard about her already, but it is always good to glorify devotees again and again. So Sunita Mataji has been part of the ISKCON Leicester congregation for the past 7 to 8 years. I don't know the exact time, Mataji. She currently supports with running Pandav Sena, being involved in youth preaching initiatives. She has supported College of Vedic Studies Leicester too, with her media and video editing skills. You know what? You need to teach me sometimes because I don't know much. Sunita Mataji also has a real interest in Ayurveda, where she undertook studies to obtain a diploma. She likes to use Ayurveda as a way to share Krishna consciousness with people by drawing parallels between the importance of self-realization, spiritual inquiry, and healthcare. That is amazing, Mataji. I think I must have spoken with you earlier as well about Ayurveda, and I'm very much interested in it. You're also looking to develop preaching opportunities using this angle. In her day job, she works in the media field again for a university. That is just amazing. She's also currently doing Bhakti Shastri, which I'm also a part of, and I can see she's really, really good in that. You listen to many classes a week by different Maharajas and Prabhupada, as well as reading regularly. You have to teach me how you do it. Thank you again, Mataji, for agreeing to take the class. And it's over to you. One more thing. I hope everyone has filled up their fuel, petrol, and diesel. If you have an extra, please let me know. I want some. Hari Hari Bol.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much, Santosh Prabhu. Just want to thank you for inviting me again. But let's begin by, I'll firstly sing Jaya Radha Madhava, and then we'll go ahead with the class in its usual format. So please join if you want to. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Rajana Ranjana Yamuna Tiravanachari Yashodanandana Rajana Ranjana Yamuna Tiravanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Rajana Ranjana Yamuna Tiravanachari Yashodanandana Rajana Ranjana Yamuna Tiravanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Hare Krishna. Jai Om Vishnupada Paramahamsa Parivrajacharya Ashtatara Shata Srimad A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jaya. Jai Om Vishnupada Paramahamsa Parivrajacharya Ashtatara Shata Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananda Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki jai. ISKCON founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Premsakaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopinath Gopal Gopinath Shyama Kund Radha Kund Giri Govardhan ki jai. Shri Vrindavana Dham ki jai. Shri Mayapur Dham ki jai. Jagannath Puri Dham ki jai. Ganga Mai ki jai. Yamuna Mai ki jai. Tulsi Devi ki jai. Bhakti Devi ki jai. Shri Harinam Sankirtan ki jai. Brihad Mridanga ki jai. Samabhakta Vrinda ki jai. All glories to the humble devotees. All glories to the humble devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. Gaura Premananda, Hari Hari Bol. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Read all the verses now in the standard format. So I'll read the Sanskrit word for word, the translation, and then the purports by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. So we're reading from Canto 1, Chapter 8, verse 50. Naino Rajna Prapa Bhartur Dharma Yude Vadodvisham Iti me na tu bodhaya kalpate shasanam vachaha. Na, never, enaha, sins, rajna, of the king, Raja Bardur, of one who is engaged in the maintenance of the citizens, dharma, for the right cause, yuddhe, in the fight, vadaha, killing, dvisham, of the enemies, iti, all these, me, for me, na, never, tu, but, bodhaya, for satisfaction, kalpate, they are meant for administration, shasanam, injunction, vachaha, words of. Translation: there is no sin for a king who kills for the right cause, who is engaged in maintaining his citizens, but this injunction is not applicable to me. Purport: Maharaja Yudhishthir thought that although he was not actually involved in the administration of the kingdom, which was being carried on well by Duryodhana without harm to the citizens, he caused the killing of so many living beings only for his personal gain of the kingdom from the hands of Duryodhana. The killing was committed not in the course of administration, but for the sake of self-aggrandizement, and as such, he thought himself responsible for all the sins. Shrinamata bandhunam drohayosav ihotitaha karma virgriha mediyer naham kalpo vyapohitum. Shrinam, of the women, mat, by me, hata, bandhunam, of the friends who are killed, droha, enmity, ya, that, asal, all those, iha, herewith, uditaha, has accrued, karmabi, by dint of work, grihamediya, by persons engaged in material welfare, na, never, aham, I, kalpaha, can expect, vyapohit. Translation: I have killed many friends of women, and I have thus caused enmity to such an extent that it is not possible to undo it by material welfare work. Purport: the Grihamedis are those whose only business is to perform welfare work for the sake of material prosperity. Such material prosperity is sometimes hampered by sinful activities, for the materialist is sure to commit sins, even unintentionally, in the course of discharging material duties. To get relief relief from such sinful reactions, the Vedas prescribe several kinds of sacrifices. It is said in the Vedas that by performing the Ashwamedha Yajna, horse sacrifice, one can get relief from even Brahmahatya, killing of a Brahmana. Yudhishthira Maharaj performed this Ashwamedha Yajna, but he thinks that even by performing such yajnas, it is not possible to get relief from the great sins committed. In war, either the husband or the brother or even the father or sons go to fight, and when they are killed, a fresh enmity is created, and thus a chain of actions and reactions increases, which is not possible to be counteracted even by thousands of Ashwamedha Yajnas. The way of work, karma, is like that. It creates one action and another reaction simultaneously, and thus increases the chain of material activities, binding the performer in material bondage. In the Bhagavad Gita 9.27 to 28, the remedy is suggested that such actions and reactions of the path of work can be checked only when work is done on behalf of the Supreme Lord. The battle of Kurukshetra was actually fought by the will of the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna, as it is evident from his version, and only by his will was Yudhishthira placed on the throne of Hastinapur. Therefore, factually, no sin whatsoever touched the Pandavas, who were only the order carriers of the Lord. For others who declare war out of personal interest, the whole responsibility lies on them. Yatha pankena pankamba sureya va surakritam bhutahatyam tate vaikam nayajner marshtum arhati. Yatha, as much as, pankena, by the mud, panka ambaha, water mixed with mud, suraya, by wine, va, either, surakritam, impurity caused by the slight touch of wine, bhutahatyam, killing of animals, tatha, like that, eva, certainly, ekam, one, na, never, yajna, by the prescribed sacrifices, marstum, to counteract, arhati, is worthwhile. Translation. As it is not possible to filter muddy water through mud or purify a wine-stained pot with wine, it is not possible to counteract the killing of men by sacrificing animals. Purport. Ashwamedha Yajnas or Gomedha Yajnas, sacrifices in which a horse or a bull is sacrificed, were not, of course, for the purpose of killing the animals. Lord Chaitanya said that such animals sacrificed on the altar of Yajna were rejuvenated and a new life was given to them. It was just to prove the efficacy of the hymns of the Vedas. By recitation of the hymns of the Vedas in a proper way, certainly the performer gets relief from the reactions of sin. But in the case of such sacrifices improperly done under the inexpert management, surely one has to become responsible for animal sacrifice. In this age of quarrel and hypocrisy, there is no possibility of performing the yajnas perfectly for want of expert brahmanas who are able to conduct such yajnas. Maharaj Yudhishthira therefore gives a hint to performing sacrifices in the age of Kali. In the Kali Yuga, the only sacrifice recommended is the performance of Harinam Yajna, inaugurated by Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But one should not indulge in animal killing and counteract it by performing the Harinam Yajna. Those who are devotees of the Lord never kill an animal for self-interest, and as the Lord ordered Arjuna, they do not refrain from performing the duty of a Kshatriya. The whole purpose, therefore, is served whenever. This is possible only for the devotees. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports of the first canto, 8th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled Prayers of Queen Kunti and Parikshit Saved. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuttapada Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitamscha Namo Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashtita Deshatarine Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Maha Vadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaye Krishna Chaitanya Namni Gauri Tushe Namaha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dino Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrinda Vaneshwari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priya Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Kevalam Kalo Naste Eva Naste Gatir Anyatha. So I just want to say a very quick thank you to Karuna Chaitanya Prabhu again for inviting me and allowing me to speak on these concluding verses of chapter 8, prayers by Queen Kunti and Parikshit saved. I'm really not qualified to be here right now. There are so many amazing devotees in Leicester. So hopefully, I pray you guys can shower me with some of your blessings so that I can maybe speak something useful today. So with regards to the verses that I'm going to be speaking on today, I found that these verses have a focus on what I consider to be to have two most principal themes. And they are duties of a king and repentance or atonement. And so I'll do my best to take us through this and discuss these themes with you. So I'd like to begin by exploring the theme around the duty. Final verses indicate Yudhishthira Maharaj, who seems to have gotten his. So I'm going to start off by just addressing this verse by looking at why Yudhishthira Maharaj felt responsible for killing all those who died in the war, and why this injunction was not applicable to him. And then we'll look at why and how he was wrong to think in such a way, despite him not sinning, and he still took responsibility for the whole war. So as we know, this verse has been spoken by Yudhishthira Maharaj, and the context is that the Mahabharata war, it's just ended, and it's killed 640 million men. That's a huge number. So to give further context to the amount of killing that has amassed, the World War One, the number of casualties in World War One was said to have been approximately 40 million. So I believe 20 million dead and 20 million wounded. And in World War Two, it was in the range of about 80 million here and there. So compare that to 640 million, which is a huge number of lives that have been lost in this Mahabharata war. So many people have died, and so Yudhishthira Maharaj is feeling that he's responsible, and he's basically taking it all up on himself. This is like the idea of so many persons being killed just simply for the sake of enthroning him on the throne of the kingdom. He was really aggrieved that, for me, so many people have died. And as a result, I've become so sinful, although I'm going to be king. As a king, the king has to be the greatest leader. He has to be completely sinless, because he has the great responsibility of leading others. So he himself has to be the best example for others to follow, which Yudhishthira Maharaj, he actually was. He really was the ideal person to be king, and not just king, but the emperor of the whole world. So Yudhishthira Maharaj knew that although for a king to kill while executing his duties isn't sinful, he thought that, I wasn't king when the war when the war had been fought. All the killing had come about simply just to make me king instead of Duryodhana. Therefore, such selfishness was surely very, very sinful. Hence why he felt as though this war was only for his personal gain and to Arjuna at the beginning of the war, if you recall, he broke down, not knowing what to do, and he was deeply lamenting about having to kill his family. And Yudhishthira Maharaj was also lamenting for similar reason, thinking, although this fight had to happen, the fight was between our own men, my brothers, my nephews, my grandfather, my teachers, and so on. They were all family. They were all like family, and I've killed them for my kingdom. How do I deal with this? So I'm sure to some degree we can relate to the emotions and feelings of Yudhishthira Maharaj here as well. This kind of feeling of guilt or regret, because although we might not be killing our family members, we might still do things in our lives, maybe even on a daily basis, where we act in ways we wish we hadn't, or said things that we may later regret because it came from a place not so pure inside of ourselves, and now we're having to face and deal with the consequences, which aren't always pleasant or easy to deal with. So similarly, Yudhishthira Maharaj, he felt as though he didn't actually kill for the right cause, as it says in the verse, which is quite interesting, because all he really did was follow Lord Krishna's instructions, because ultimately the Pandavas were the order carriers of the Lord. So it seems quite, it seems out of character for Yudhishthira Maharaj to be thinking in this way. We'll have a look at this a bit later on as well. So one of the other reasons for his remorse, it says in the verse, there is no sin for a king who is engaged in maintaining his citizens. So Yudhishthira Maharaj felt remorse because he felt Duryodhana was actually carrying out the administration well for the citizens, because there was no actual harm done to them under his rule. But then if that was all it takes to be a king, then why did such a huge war happen? Why would such a huge war happen if that was really a bona fide reason as to why he was sinful or shouldn't be king? Because Lord Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, he says, Paritranaya sadhunam vinashaya cha duskritam dharma samstarpanataya sambhavami yuga yuga. So Krishna comes to deliver the pious and to annihilate the miscreants, as well as to reestablish the principles of religion. And he comes millennium after millennium to do that. So because, the whole point was to reinstate Dharma again. And just because Duryodhana wasn't harming the citizens, he was, in essence, he was in it for himself. This war happened because he wanted to rule for the sake of ruling. He was very envious and unreasonable towards the Pandavas, and unlike Yudhishthira Maharaj, it was all for his own self-aggrandizement and self-interest. And so reinstating Dharma again could only be possible if Yudhishthira, only the son of Dharmaraj, and I guess Dharma personified, but he was also a pure devotee of Lord Krishna, which, being a devotee king, it was to his and everyone else's benefit, actually. So the fact that the citizens were not harmed wasn't actually good enough, because the king's duties, they're not limited to only thinking about the citizens' material welfare, but more importantly, it's the king's duty to take care of the spiritual welfare too, which Duryodhan never really executed, nor did he himself practice or seem to have any interest in. You could even say that he was more like a humanitarian in one sense, out for everyone's basic needs for their bodies. So making sure that everyone had access to water, everyone was sheltered, everyone had food, everyone was clothed. But we've heard from Srila Prabhupada that these activities that pertain simply to maintaining the body and mind, whether it's humanitarianism, altruism, philanthropism, all these isms, Srila Prabhupada said are futile activities, as they keep one bound and entangled in the material world. And so, although these things are, they're nice, but Duryodhan, he wasn't really doing anybody any real favors, because there was no hope for his citizens nor his kingdom to flourish, because Krishna, or God, Krishna wasn't at the center of his rule. Rather, his selfish tendencies and desires for the Pandavas' riches and inheritance was what was actually on his mind. There's actually so much written in the Shastras about Raja Dharma, so the Dharma of a king, and it's a great science, because the kings were actually trained systematically to become these really perfected, refined characters, really munificent, and to not just become these tax collectors, which is what we see of our modern day government and leaders. They were actually trained to perform different sacrifices only for the prosperity of the subjects. And isn't that amazing? These kings, they took their responsibility to lead so seriously, to care for the citizens by protecting and providing for them. So so the state's duty, or the king's duties, back then, they were so directed that ultimately everyone engages in devotional service to the Supreme Lord. So the government, or the government head, they're actually supposed to be the representative of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and they're therefore supposed to see that the citizens are best placed for spiritual advancement, and also that they are situated in the social order, so the four varnas and the four ashrams. So so these kings, they were trained. They were trained also not to be very merciful, to criminals, and they were punished in such ways that in the future no one would actually dare commit any nuisances and crimes again, which is why Yudhishthira Maharaj, he really didn't need to lament, because it was his duty to protect the citizens and the kingdom from the Kauravas, and therefore engage in this war to ultimately be an instrument in Krishna's will to annihilate the miscreants who were the Kauravas. The kings, they gave special protection to illiterates, also those who are helpless, like children, brahmanas, cows, widows of the state as well, who come under the women class, obviously. Hence why Yudhishthira Maharaj expressed his concern for the for women in verse 51, since so many of them had become without husbands and fathers or sons to protect them as a result of the war. I actually even read in the Manusmriti that those women who have absolutely nobody to protect them, because a woman, she should always be protected at every stage of her life. The king would then be declared to be the woman's guardian. So these kings, it wasn't just out of duty, but they genuinely cared for their subjects. They really wanted the best for their welfare. So when the king is actually following his duties, it says in this is really interesting that in his next life, he actually shares 1/6 of the result of the pious activities of the citizens. But if the king, if all he does is just collect taxes from the citizens, but doesn't actually give them proper protection, then the results of his own pious activities are taken away by the citizens. And not only that, but in exchange of him not being able to give proper protection, he then becomes liable to punishment for the impious activities of his people. So that's a huge responsibility. And you can just imagine the state the world is in right now and how leaders rule, which isn't always in the best interest of the citizens. There's so much corruption and ruling happening for self-interest, and it's quite scary to think about what lies ahead for them if their own pious activities are taken away, but also get punished for the sinful activities of the citizens. So therefore, it was always in the king's interest to ensure that he led in such a way that his subjects could flourish, and that wasn't just materially, but more importantly, spiritually. We could even look at modern day rulers. Take Hitler, for example, who fought for the completely wrong cause, because the basis of his fighting, of his war, was entirely on the bodily platform, where he just wanted to wipe out the so-called lower races, and wanted to create his own version of the Aryan race with blonde hair and blue eyes. And so he wiped out thousands of Jewish people just because they were not of the German race, or pure-blooded, as he would refer to them. So he considered them to be the most superior, and that was just due to his gross identification with the body. So his cause for war was completely on the body platform. It had nothing to do with even the material welfare of certain citizens of Germany, what to speak of spiritual. Instead of actually making any attempt at peace, he used terror and propaganda to control and influence his subjects. He actually showed no compassion or mercy to those he killed in concentration camps, and he was just in complete illusion and bent on creating this superior race, something which all of these things was absolutely guilt-free of. He knew how to rule a kingdom. He was a pure devotee, therefore Krishna would be at the center of it. So he was the ideal king who, unlike Hitler, did have the welfare of his subjects in mind, not just materially, but to help them advance beyond this bodily concept of life and eventually become free from material entanglement altogether, which makes a true king and leader. So these were some of the reasons why Yudhishthira Maharaj was feeling so aggrieved, and also what the duties of a king looks like, and I guess also how one shouldn't rule as per Hitler's example. So it was interesting, I guess, as to why Yudhishthira Maharaj was thinking in this way, that he was a sinner and he was so aggrieved. So just to share a few points as to why Yudhishthira Maharaj, he didn't actually need to feel the way he was feeling and thinking that he was sinful, and that the injunction was not applicable to him. So we can explore that now. So as I mentioned, Yudhishthira Maharaj, he was a pure devotee, and of course, being a Kshatriya king, not only Dharmraj, he knew all the Shastric injunctions for military warfare and the rules for waging war and how exactly to rule a kingdom. And for a Kshatriya, a rightful war, a Dharma Yudh, is permitted because the king is responsible for the protection and welfare of his subjects. So when there is some harm or threat to them or the kingdom, even if it is coming from within the family, the king, he's permitted to kill. He's permitted to kill to protect his citizens. So a Kshatriya king who's going to war for the protection of his citizens, there's no sin incurred there. So the Pandavas, they also tried to stop the war on so many occasions. Even Krishna, but unfortunately, it was never received well by the Kauravas. So it wasn't actually as though the Pandavas, they wanted to have this war. Even right from the beginning, we can see from Kunti Maharani's prayers, when she's addressing all the dangers that came their way, that the Kauravas were not only trying to constantly harm them, but they were trying to kill them as well. Krishna, he mentions in the Bhagavad Gita, there are 6 kinds of aggressors who you actually have the right to kill and no sin will occur. So aggressor number 1 is a poison giver, and this was poison was given to Bhim, but somehow he actually only came out stronger from that incident. But they tried to poison them as well. Aggressor number 2 is somebody who sets fire to the house. They attempted this as well. They tried to burn down the house that was made of lac. Aggressor number 3, one who attacks with deadly weapons. They were constantly trying to attack and kill the Pandavas, even when they were exiled. Number 4, aggressor number 4 is one who plunders riches. So Yudhishthira Maharaj, he was actually meant to be king. It was actually his rightful inheritance. But his father Pandu, he was actually the original king, but due to his father's untimely death, and because the Pandavas, they were so young when this happened, his blind brother Dhritarashtra, he therefore Maharaj was old enough to be made king. That was the idea, but also because Dhritarashtra was blind, he was not eligible to be king, although he was the eldest brother, which he actually wasn't very happy about. And he really held a begrudging and envious feeling in his heart towards that situation and towards the Pandavas. So when the opportune moment came to usurp the kingdom, they took it basically. Akrura, even Akrura, he was sent by Lord Krishna to see the Pandavas and just to see how they were getting on, where he stayed there for quite some time, just to see what was happening. And he saw that the Pandavas, they were always under threat. They were always being troubled by the gurus. And so he actually gave counsel to Dhritarashtra, advising that what they are doing is wrong, and like what they are in pursuance of is not very good, and that you should actually give the kingdom back. Otherwise, and he said quite directly that your sons are going to die. And it's quite interesting because Dhritarashtra, he said, I know this, my love and my affection for them is blinding my decisions and that ultimately prevented him from doing what was right. So Dhritarashtra, he was actually therefore both physically but also spiritually blind, so he couldn't actually do the right thing. Aggressor number 5 is one who occupies another's land, and that's what the Kauravas were doing also. They were not even willing to give even 5 villages that they had asked for after their exile. And aggressor number 6 was one who kidnaps a wife. They did this as well when they took Draupadi and dragged her by her hair into the assembly hall full of men and wanted to see her naked, which I think set the whole thing in motion, and the war practically became inevitable after that point. So at that time, when every attempt to avoid the war was made, that's when war can be declared, which is a dharma yudh. So they tried to settle the matter, but it wasn't possible. So as a last resort, they had to take to fighting. But according to Yudhishthira Maharaj, just due to his bewilderment, there are some consequences for all of this. By killing a family member, Srila Prabhupada says in the purport of verse 51, 51, that in war, when either the husband or the brother or father or son, when they go to fight and they are killed, a fresh enmity is created, especially by mind, it produces almost an endless chain of actions and reactions, because they may want to actually take revenge, just as we saw with Ashwatthama and Brahmastra in the previous chapter. So Ashwatthama, he killed the sons of the Bandhus, and so that was his revenge for killing for the seemingly unfair way Duryodhan was killed by Bhim, for also maybe killing his father and ultimately losing the war. So all of this created that enmity, and then Arjuna went after Ashwatthama. So there's another reaction, and then Ashwatthama released the Brahmastra, and that's another reaction. And as a result of that, Arjuna, he released his Brahmastra to counteract and withdraw both of them. But still Maharaj Parikshit was hurt, but Krishna revived him. So we can see that, there's this chain reaction which is constantly happening, and binding us further and further into this, into the material world, which is something we really want to avoid. So the point is that Yudhishthira Maharaj, he didn't really have any reason to lament based on the points we've just looked at. But above and beyond this, he was simply just following the instructions of the Lord. There was no sin factually touched. No sin touched him or the Pandavas. But still, Yudhishthira Maharaj, he still felt the need to repent, which nicely leads me to my next theme, which I'd like to discuss with you, which is repentance or atonement, actually. So Yudhishthira Maharaj, he was repenting, even though he was not sinful. This is actually a sign of a pure devotee. The pure devotee by nature is very humble. He's very meek and very compassionate. He never thinks he has done anything good, but in fact thinks himself to be the lowest and the greatest sinner of all. Made me think of Bhakti Vinod Thakur, who displays this very nicely in his Sharanagati prayers, where he's very sincerely confessing all of his worldly desires and impulses, even as a pure devotee. But actually, this is only to teach us and what our mood should be. So Yudhishthira Maharaj's concern here is basically how to counteract the sinful reactions that he's so afraid he's going to have to do, because due to his feeling extremely guilty about what's happened, because he said no amount of welfare work, specifically the Ashwamedha Yajna, is going to help me get out of this mess. So what should I do? In the Srimad Bhagavatam, it explains that there is a process for counteracting the reactions to sinful activity, which is basically to atone. However, this process is just as Yudhishthira Maharaj expresses in verse 52, that trying to counteract one action through another is useless because it's still binding. So trying to counteract still binding because it still has a binding result. So I actually decided to look up this pastime in the Mahabharata book. And just like Arjuna, Yudhishthira Maharaj, he was completely debilitated by the situation, that nobody could pacify him, absolutely nobody, not even Lord Krishna. He was so weakened at heart that he didn't even want to rule anymore. He thought that the best way to overcome this situation was to atone. But his understanding of atonement under his deluded state was to actually give up his kingly robes, was to give up his position as king and go to the forest and renounce everything, just like Arjuna thought at the beginning of the war. But Krishna actually says, 18, that prescribed duties should never be renounced. If one gives up prescribed duties because of delusion, such renunciation is said to be in the mode of ignorance. So this renunciation that Yudhishthira Maharaj was considering was not the right thing for him to do, because that renunciation would have been in the mode of ignorance. I thought this was actually quite an important lesson, as it just goes to show how important it is for us to do the duties that are prescribed to us. We cannot actually run away from or neglect them, because that in itself is sin. And if we're trying to get out of this reactionary life, it's only going to entangle us more rather than free us. It's interesting because sometimes a pious act may look sinful, and a sinful act might look pious, and as a result it can become very confusing as to what one should really do. And in the context of Yudhishthira Maharaj's current situation, this seemingly pious act of renouncing himself appeared like the right thing to do. It appeared noble, but actually it would have been a sinful act, because that was not his duty. His duty was to rule the kingdom. That was the whole purpose as to why the war happened in the first place. So everyone was trying to make him see that this is not right. You cannot atone by giving up your duty, but in fact, you can actually attain liberation by performing your prescribed duties, which is all he needed to do. So again, in the Bhagavad Gita, in the purport of chapter 2, text 47, Srila Prabhupada writes, everyone has his proprietary right in regard to prescribed duties, but should act without attachment to the result. Such disinterested obligatory duties doubtlessly lead one to the path of liberation. So by this, we can understand that Yudhishthira Maharaj was aggrieved due to this attachment he had to the result of the war. But had he have just remained detached from the auspicious or inauspiciousness of his work, and saw this as his duty regardless, which was ultimately serving a higher purpose anyway, he'd have no reason to be aggrieved. But he just wasn't convinced that this was going to save him, and because he started accusing his brothers for being too attached to the material world, which I thought was funny, because he was actually justifying himself. He was justifying his ignorance and illusion with this excuse. We could even reflect on that and ask ourselves, how often do we do this? We may do something wrong, but end up justifying why we did it through some self-righteous excuse. I knew what I was doing, but this is actually very dangerous. It's a very dangerous thing we can do to ourselves, because not only, because it only acts as a barrier between you and Krishna, because you're actually actively choosing to remain in ignorance. You're choosing to hide behind comfort and not having to change in any way, because maybe it's too painful or it's too uncomfortable. But if we want to lessen our conditioning, then we really have to be very honest with ourselves. We have to be really authentic and just admit that, yes, I've done wrong. I recognize I did this and I shouldn't have. It actually says in Shastra that admitting your sin and repenting to God, it actually purifies you. So we should always be ready to embrace that discomfort, no matter how uncomfortable it may make you, or how painful it may be. At least we'll be situated in truth rather than ignorance, because it's actually only due to ignorance that this tight knot of our false ego, it keeps getting tighter and tighter otherwise. So this situation, it also made me think about the analogy of how this material world is like a prison house, and how we are all sinners inside of it, or criminals inside of it. And it made me laugh. Is in prison, they shouldn't really feel so proud of himself, because he's committed some shameful or sinful act. But here we are as also as sort of prisoners, but we still seem to have this tendency to want to enjoy whilst in prison, to have this tendency to hold our heads up high and feel proud about something, or feel little shame about our bad habits. And it just makes you think, why is that? Why do we do this? What have we possibly done? What do we have that we should be so proud of, whilst in prison? That we should be enjoying ourselves here, and we're obviously here for a reason, and it's definitely not because I guess because we've not been on our best behavior, or to frolic around and have the time of your life in prison, which is quite amusing, but doesn't really make sense. So it's I think, if you even think about, if you just imagine someone who's actually in prison, and he takes so much pride of his cell that they're inside of, just by keeping it very neat and tidy, or maybe he's looking forward to, I don't know, a burger he's going to have for lunch, and he's going to enjoy it, but it's silly that, it's like, hello, you're in prison, you shouldn't be trying to enjoy in the first place. Rather, he needs to think about what he's done, and genuinely feel sorry and repent for that. So these verses, they just really made me realize the importance of repenting, because if we don't sincerely feel any regrets, or feel sorry for the unhelpful things that we do in our lives, that act as blocks in our spiritual advancement, then how will we ever change? How will we improve? And how will we ever please Guru? Yeah, I think that's why we probably have to take responsibility and take this process very seriously, because it's the only thing that can actually save us. This also made me think about why and how pure devotees are always so humble, because I think they genuinely consider themselves to be sinners, the lowest of the low, and so they keep their heads hanging low, not in depression but in all humility, because they genuinely feel that they have misbehaved even though they haven't. And I find that so inspiring. But unlike them, and I can speak for myself, we certainly haven't behaved in some way or other. So we're kind of in a prison right now, which means I guess it's in our interest to try and be on our best behavior if we kind of want to shorten our time here. But fortunately for us, all thanks to Srila Prabhupada, being on our best behavior, so to speak, it isn't as difficult as it could be, because he has made it so much easier for us, because he's given us this almost get out of jail free card, where the prison doors are currently but momentarily open. They're open for the next 10,000 years, which I guess in the context of eternality, it's actually a blip, just a blink of an eyelid. Just imagine you're in prison and the prison officers, they've opened the door for 30 seconds, and anyone who wants to get out, they have this 30 seconds window opportunity to do that before the door shut again. So this movement is our chance to get out, and it's so valuable. So yeah, I think I just find these verses really inspiring to really try and increase my urgency to free myself from getting out of this prison. So just going back to Yudhishthira Maharaj, he's saying that basically to counteract one action through another is useless because it is binding, essentially. And we definitely don't want that. Not only that, but simply by atoning, there's no actual guarantee that you won't commit that same sin again. And it's a bit like the example of the elephant bathing, who only then goes and throws more mud and dirt over itself again. So there's no value in such atonement. And Yudhishthira Maharaj is actually hinting at this, that in Kali Yuga, this process of performing sacrifices like the Ashwamedh Yajna is not going to help anyone. Firstly, we don't actually have the means to fulfill such a huge yajna, nor do we have qualified Brahmins to do so. Therefore, in the Kali Yuga, the only sacrifice that is recommended is the performance of Harinam Yajna, which has been inaugurated by Lord Chaitanya. Shukadeva Goswami, he says that even though austerity, charity, and the performance of ritualistic ceremonies for counteracting sinful activities are recommended processes in the Shastra, they still can't actually remove the sinful desire seed from the heart, which is the reason why people keep committing sinful activities. Just because somebody goes to prison for murder doesn't necessarily mean they are not going to murder again. So therefore, such atonement is useless. So the whole point is to remove the sinful desire seeds altogether. These bad habits that we yes, why is it so hard to stop them? It's actually because of the sinful desires that exists deep within our hearts, and it cannot be uprooted by performing karma, basically. That's what Yudhishthira Maharaj is saying in this verse. It can only be gradually vanquished by performing devotional service, by chanting the holy names of the Lord. In other words, Harinam, Sankirtan Yajna. Even Parikshit Maharaj, when he had famously asked Shukadeva Goswami about atonement, that what is the value of such atonement if one is going to commit this the same sin again? And Shukadeva Goswami replied, just to test his intelligence, that the process to counteract sinful reactions is to adopt the process of atonement according to Shastra. But Parikshit Maharaj, he rejected this process of atonement because he considered this process to have little value for saving one from sinful activities, because regardless of how many times, if he's attached to sense enjoyment, then he's gonna commit sinful acts again and again until he's trained to refrain from enjoying the senses, or he performs devotional service. Srila Rupa Goswami, he also explains that when a person commits a sinful activity, apart from the sinful reaction which awaits you, there is also another effect, and this effect is that the propensity to commit more sin, it increases. So atonement can remove the effect of the direct sinful reaction, but but not the increase in the propensity to commit more sin. So this propensity can be removed only by devotional service to Supreme Lord. So this is actually what real atonement is, which is, in one sense, we are hopefully all practicing daily. We're atoning daily by rendering devotional service and gradually uprooting our repeat tendencies to perform bad habits, being laziness, envy, sleeping too much, being tactless or insensitive in the way we deal with people, being judgmental or critical of others, because ultimately these are all blocks in our devotional life, especially if we keep making excuses for ourselves for doing them. So yes, I hope some of these points and reflections have been of use in some way. Before I close, I just want to draw on a final point, which I think will lead us nicely into the next chapter, which is the passing away of Bhishmadev. And that is that although Yudhishthira Maharaj became aggrieved and appeared to have been an illusion, he wasn't really, he wasn't actually in illusion. The whole thing was set up just like a director directs a movie. It was just like a show. And we can understand this by the purport of verse 47, where Srila Prabhupada writes, King Yudhishthira, though he was not expected to become aggrieved like a common man, became deluded by worldly affection by the will of the Lord, just as Arjuna was apparently deluded at the beginning of the battle. This was because there was another great idea behind this delusion, and that was that Yudhishthira Maharaj would be instructed by Bhishmadev as Arjuna was instructed by the Lord himself. But why might this actually be the case? I thought this was a nice thing to look into, and it's because Lord Krishna, he just wanted to glorify his devotee. He gets a lot of pleasure out of glorifying his devotee, or hearing or seeing his devotees become glorious, much more than his own glory. So Krishna is interested in the glory of his devotee. So in one sense, Lord Krishna accepts defeat, so to say, because he was ready to come to the position that he himself was not able to pacify Yudhishthira Maharaj when he was feeling utterly disheartened. However, Bhishmadev was able to console Yudhishthira Maharaj, showing that Bhishmadev is actually better than him in that respect. And Lord Krishna, he derives a lot of pleasure by doing these kinds of acts. Yeah, I think that's yeah. I guess we can. If there's a verse in Bhagavad Gita chapter 11 where it says prepare to fight and win glory. So yeah, Krishna, he's so kind and merciful to his devotees that he just wants to give and who basically carry out his plan according to his desire. Sorry. So that's a secret behind this as to why Yudhishthira Maharaj was feeling the way he was, because Lord Krishna orchestrated everything almost like a show, and he sometimes puts the devotees under a certain situation just so that he can teach common people like ourselves, and unintelligent people in Kali Yuga, so that we can see ourselves relate to that position and drive. And just also to say that Krishna, he basically wanted to show that even a great fighter like Bhishma couldn't win the battle of Kurukshetra, because the Lord wanted to basically show that vice cannot conquer virtue regardless of who tries to execute it, meaning that if you're on the wrong side of the battle, if you're not trying to please Krishna, you're not going to win no matter how talented or skilled you may be. It's because it's a matter of working for the Supreme Lord and carrying out his orders and fulfilling his instructions, regardless of any tribulations that may come our way, as they did for the Pandavas, and rather accept them as favors from the Lord. So yes, this brings me to the end of today's Srimad Bhagavatam class on the concluding 3 verses of Canto 1, Chapter 8, Prayers of Queen Kunti and Parikshit Save. So I just want to thank you all so much for attending this morning and listening. But if anybody has any questions or corrections or any comments or thoughts you'd like to share, I invite you all to do so. Please forgive me if there was any kind of mistakes in my presentation or delivery. Yeah, please do correct me. And yeah, but thank you so much. I pray I can hopefully serve better next time. Hare Krishna. Santosh Prabhu or Karuna Chaitanya Prabhu.
Yeah, Hare Krishna Mataji, thank you so much for so many wonderful insights on these verses. I like the point which you made about Srila Prabhupada opening up the gateways for us. Thank you so much, Mataji. Wonderful class. I I request everyone, if they have any comments or any questions, please come forward, unmute yourself and ask Mataji.
Hare Krishna, Mataji. It was a wonderful, wonderful class. I'm just thinking about, you see the fuel crisis. Sorry, I keep getting back to that. If Yudhishthira Maharaj was the king now, we wouldn't have a crisis like that. I'm just saying. thank you so much. Again, so many points to take away. And we look forward to your next class, Mataji. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Prabhuji. Thank you all for coming.
And also in this regard, there are beautiful classes by His Holiness Radha Govind Maharaj. If any of you know Hindi, then do listen to his classes. They are available on YouTube, especially on Bhishma Stuti, with the relationship that Krishna and Yudhishthira Maharaj had. Yudhishthira Maharaj, because he was elder, he had a Vatsalya ras between Krishna and him, and how he didn't listen to his advice. And Krishna, as Mataji said, Krishna directs him to speak to or brings him to Bhishma Dev on his deathbed, and glorifies his devotee, one of the Mahajans, 12 Mahajans, Bhishma Dev. Thank you so much, Mataji. Let's
Can
meet
we
once
ask?
again.
Sorry, can we ask devotees to ask any questions, suggestions, or comments? Please, if you can. Anything you feel, honestly. See how I jumped to the petrol crisis and diesel crisis. You can do anything. Please.
It looks like everyone is satisfied by Mataji's class.
Okay, yes, bro.
Next week, His Grace Bhaktiman Prabhu will be giving class. He will begin the new chapter, Bhishma Stuti. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. If there are no questions or comments, so we'll end the class here. Her Grace Sunita Mataji ki jai.
Jai.
Hare Krishna. Thank you. Nice class.